All right, we're live. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the RocketMSP Podcast. I'm Steve Taylor, your host. Today I'm joined by Eric Hester, actually, from Umbrella Technology Group. Now, this sounds like, I don't know, some kind of evil corporation.
Yeah, that's usually the connection people make right away is to the Resident Evil Umbrella Corporation. But I was going for the more all-encompassing technology provider. Yeah, it's hard not to make that connection.
Yeah, so I'm going to sound like a loser. I didn't really get into the Resident Evil games.
I didn't much either. I watched the movies a couple times too, but yeah, it absolutely. I mean, I know what Umbrella Corp was, and definitely did not come to mind as I was building it, but it has very much since I have done it.
Oh, good. Now there's an insurance company, and I swear their logo is an umbrella.
Travelers Insurance, yeah, has an umbrella. Ours is a little bit different. It's just kind of built into the logo.
Yeah. No, it's nice to go from like one extreme to the other,
Right.
I feel like you're probably more toward the traveler's side, if you will. So
yeah, that was another kind of unintended consequence, that it is a little bit like, umbrella insurance, kind of full coverage kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we've touched on the fact that you're a technology company, and if you weren't, or some type of technology company, it would be weird to have you here. But let's talk about what you do. So you're not a vendor to MSPs.
Not intentionally or specifically. I mean, we are an MSP, but given my background, so maybe it makes sense to cover that a little bit. So
yeah,
this is probably, depends on how you look at it, my fourth or fifth startup since I was a teenager. Previous to this, I was the CTO at Green Cloud Technologies. And I think there's a chance we actually spoke on one of your podcasts once in the past, years ago when I was there. So prior to that, I was the head of engineering for a large CLEC, which is now Windstream. And then at the very beginning, when I was a teenager, I started an ISP in the 90s called Carolina Online down here in South Carolina. So the interesting thing and why I went through all that was all of those businesses were channel focused. We always sold through the channel.
Right.
So since the very beginning, I've had very tight connection with managed service providers, at the time in the 90s, computer stores, break fix people, telecom agents, the basically the technology reseller community. But I always saw it from kind of the outside as the vendor, and a lot of times all the way within the engineering organization. Kind of as my career progressed, I've moved more towards front facing, doing more sales and marketing and still doing the technology side of things and the engineering, but being that progressed into, kind of managing the whole company more and more over time. I saw a lot of, I guess you could say what people do right and what people do wrong, but more really what was working for some MSPs and what was not working for others. And then I also saw the challenge a lot of MSPs were going through in the recent years, transitioning to cloud and security services. There was the first big transition from break fix to monthly recurring services and VCIO and all those kind of MSP 2.0 things. It feels like there's another one going on now. I used to always talk about MSP 3.0 or, kind of the cloud managed service provider or the MSSP type model, all of those things. So long story short,
I feel like those two are very different things though.
Yeah, they are. My point was, it's kind of, there's a third direction people are going, where they either decided to in-house progress to cloud and security, or people have specialized off from being an MSP to something like an MSSP or a cloud service provider and selling back into the MSP community now. But the bottom line is cloud and security has become a big part of, the progression. So I saw that, and I've always been a lot of people say this, but I've always been a very customer-centric, kind of empathetic personality. Like I want to know what people are concerned about and what's working and what's not, and solve those technology problems as opposed to sitting way back in an engineering organization and kind of guessing what's wrong out there and what products need to exist. So I kind of wanted to get back to the customer again. And so that's what Umbrella is. Umbrella is a kind of a full turnkey MSP. We do security services all the way to physical security, cameras, access control, all that kind of stuff. Cybersecurity, obviously, compliance. And then I'm still obviously a big cloud advocate. I'm still an investor in Green Cloud. So we use Green Cloud, Azure, Google, those services as well. And then all the traditional, managed services where we're managing the infrastructure. But we kind of take a different angle is what I tried to do, where we come in and be very consultative from a extreme aspect, where like we actually come in and say, our sales process is kind of what's working for you in IT, which generally makes people tell you everything that's not working in IT as opposed to what's working. And then we say, okay, well, we're going to fix those top 2 items for free, right? We're going to come in. This isn't a technology evaluation. This isn't a security assessment, a lot of the things that everybody's doing. This is let us prove to you we know what we're doing. We're going to take away your 2 biggest pains for no charge. And, obviously there's caveats within reason what we can do there, but that's the angle we want. We want to be seen as enhancing someone's business, not just being their IT department. So to circle back to your question, we also do that for other MSPs. So if you've got an MSP who doesn't feel comfortable with the cloud side of things, or doesn't feel comfortable with compliance, or some of those areas like that, we can augment, and we have done that. It's not our core business, but it is something that I have a lot of background, like I said, from being in the channel community, that I can bring those things to bear and help people create a practice potentially, if not augment it myself. But, the core business is serving small business. The other thing I'm doing that I think will kind of differentiate, I don't know if this is relevant to the whole community out there, but I call it the Chick-fil-A model. So basically, we are building markets. I define a market as an area code, basically as a dividing line, and I'm hiring people with the intent that you are coming into this company to be management in the future, right? So whether you come in as a tech, or you come in as a service delivery person, or you come in as a salesperson, or someone in accounting or administrative, your goal is to learn the other facets of the business. Your goal is to learn how the financial side of things works. Your goal is to learn how, customer service and account management works. And one day you will be given an area code and you'll be the general manager and build a environment with support back from corporate. So it's 2 facets of what I call the Chick-fil-A model. That's how Chick-fil-A works. None of the individual restaurants are owned by the, general manager. They're owned by the corporation. And everybody who is a general manager started all the way as someone at the register, and it's a way to keep it where everyone cares, right? They feel like it's more their business, and I'm able to, keep the concept of, we liked working with Eric. He really seemed to care because it was his business, and they keep that feeling with, everybody I hire, because they feel that way too. They're getting a percentage of our EBITDA as they grow and things like that. So I did this kind of as, like I said, seeing best practices from a lot of MSPs. So I'm implementing them for myself, but I'm also kind of in the business of consulting to others to help them implement these practices as well as they prove themselves out.
Okay. So let's talk about kind of the thing that I'm almost sick of talking about it, okay?
Mhm.
But let's talk about cybersecurity for a little bit.
Sure.
I see it up on your website. It's up in the top 3 column area of your services. Cybersecurity, innovative technology backed by your own $250,000 cyber insurance policy.
Yeah, so that's another thing we did. We actually partnered with Chubb Insurance. They have the Cysurance subsidiary, and we were one of the first partners in that organization. So one of the things we thought about is people are used to the concept of insurance as a solution, right? If it's a problem that you think is very unlikely, how you usually solve it is buying an insurance policy, right? You don't go out of your way to come up with flood and fire protection. You do what's required by code, and then you buy insurance for it. So the same thing here. We're able to resell Cysurance's policies based on the fact that we put in basic cybersecurity practices, a firewall, intrusion detection, EDR agents on their machines. Because of that, the policy is less expensive because they know their risk is less. Mm-hmm. So it's twofold. One, if it's something that the customer sees as a value, we can focus on the insurance angle, and it gets them to do something about cybersecurity, because we don't just sell the insurance. We're going to also put in new equipment, start monitoring, and things like that, or they can't get the policy. So a lot of what we've tried to do is come up with ways to present a lot of these things a little differently, because everybody knows this. If you've got to spend your time to convince somebody they need something, they're not going to buy it because they don't believe they need it. I mean, if you're having to convince them that it's important and they don't already believe it, your chances of making them think it's important are very slim. So trying to find angles that are relatable to them and make sense is something we've been trying to do a lot of. With healthcare, some of the secondary healthcare, we take the angle of continuing education, for instance. They're all used to going and getting recertified on a lot of the things they do. So we call it cybersecurity hygiene, right? Because it's something they relate to. And we do continuing education in the form of bite-sized training that comes to them in email. We do lunch and learns and come in and they get a certificate that says they are participating in a ongoing cybersecurity program, which again is something very familiar to them around, if it's a dentist office, they have to do hygiene, continuing education. They've had to go through all kinds of enhanced education and changes related to PPF for COVID. So it's, insurance and education and some of those components that aren't traditionally included in an IT setting. We're trying to include those not only because they're important, but because those are more relatable to people. And it's something that makes them more comfortable with the rest of the solution.
Now, you said PPF. I'm familiar with personal protective equipment. PPE.
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant PPE.
Okay.
It was just a slip. But yeah, that's been another interesting, scenario as well. We have a dentist office, for instance, that they were using a lot of alternative ways to authenticate any, biometrics and things like that. Well, once they started wearing masks and shields and gloves and full gowns, a lot of that stuff was no longer feasible. So we actually moved to where they wear an NFC bracelet that authenticates them, so that they can just, tap their computer. You authenticate once in the morning using that band to prove it's you. And then from then on, simply tapping the band logs them in. It logs them in and out of doors. So things like that. I've been trying to, we as a team have been trying to go in and find out, what is it that really, that's the questions we ask. What is most annoying to you about technology? What have you learned to accept that you should not have to accept? Because it really blows my mind the number of things people have accepted about technology. If you're a nerd, you don't accept something annoying that happens every time. You find a way to fix it. Your typical user, they just accept that, well, I have to log in 50 times a day and it never gets any easier, or this process takes 3 minutes every time I do it, but that's just how it's always been, so it must be right. We try to identify those things up front. If you solve those type problems, then people are much more willing to let you work on the things that need to be fixed but are not important to them, right? A lot of the back end cybersecurity stuff and everything else. So again, we've just been trying to find ways to make the relationship form quicker, get the trust there, so that you can do a lot of these back office cybersecurity stuff, things that people are just, it's not going to happen to me type mentality. But it's getting to the point where it is happening to them, and it's happening to everybody they know. But even at that, they're not sure what to do, so you got to kind of get in that trusted advisor space, which is, as much as I'm a technologist and have been on the engineering side, I try to stay away from talking about technology solutions to problems and talking to them more about, the mentality and that kind of stuff they need to have, because they're tired of being talked down to. They're tired of being confused all the time.
All right. So 1 second. So for those of you that are just joining us or joined us a little later, I'm speaking with Eric Hester, owner of the MSP Umbrella Technology Group, and if you have questions, if you're watching this live, please toss them in the comments, and we will get to those as we can. I have a question. Sure. I want to know more about this NFC bracelet thing.
Sure. So there's a couple different varieties. You can go really complicated or pretty straightforward. So the most straightforward version is really just and I don't have one right with me, or I would show you, but it basically looks like one of the Livestrong bracelets or something. It's rubbery, and it just has an NFC chip in it. And that's, like I said, the simplest version. You actually authenticate, the first time you log in, you click your band, and then you actually use your AD credentials to log in. And then that ties, the band is already tied to your authentication, but that ties the fact that a human took the effort to log in. It's kind of a multi-factor initial authentication. So now for your, unlocking your screen, re-authenticating to Windows, you just have to click the band. There's a USB dongle it hangs off the side of all the monitors or tablets or whatever the user is using, and they just authenticate that way. And then, like I said, we're also using an NFC-based access control system for the doors. So you also just click the card readers, with your armband, so you don't have to take your gloves off or go in your pocket or touch anything that's not
sure.
There is another version which is more.
But isn't that kind of a security risk in itself? Because, don't get me wrong, I love gadgety. I would buy these all day long just because they're cool.
Yep.
But now, isn't there a risk that, okay, I've authenticated, and now an intruder comes into the building and takes my bracelet off of it?
Yep. So that's what I was getting. It depends on the vulnerability level. How secure is the back office where these are? Like, one of the places that uses them heavily is a lab doing testing. All the area they're in there working is a secured area. Nobody's coming in and out of there anyway. It's really there to speed up their authentication more than anything, because they're having to do chain of custody. So they have to, every time they do something, they have to authenticate again to prove it was them doing it. Same thing with even like a dentist. Every time they go in and put something new in the chart, they have to authenticate again to prove it was them putting it in the chart.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as much about protecting them from access to the machine as speeding up the process, because the physical door access controls and cameras and all those things, physical access is supposed to limit a lot of that. But if we get into a scenario where it's extremely imperative that not happen, what you just described, they make another type of armband that it basically is almost like a smartwatch. You put it on.
Detects when it's been removed.
Yeah, and it actually detects your heart rate and your skin temperature and everything. And when you take it off, it de-authenticates. So you authenticate the same way I just described in the morning, and you're good until you take it off again, or whatever timeout you put on there. But if somebody removes it, and even if they cut your hand off, which, let's be honest, that's an extreme example, your heart rate would stop then. So
yeah, that's true.
You couldn't remove it. Those are very expensive, though. And again, most of these places are using, you kind of got to pick your battles in some cases. It's such a vast improvement over what they were doing before. Eventually, yes, I would like to move them to the next level of that. Maybe make them have to do a multi-factor PIN or something like that in addition to it. But considering a lot of times in one case, they weren't even logging into their machines at all. They had a machine level login that auto logged in when they came in the morning. It was, so you kind of got to look at the extremes of what you're doing and move them. And that's another thing I'm trying to do is move people as slowly as I can towards these solutions so that they don't resist. Because obviously I could have made that a lot more secure, but I've had scenarios where I did that and people said, turn this off. I can't do my job. This is ridiculous. I don't want to deal with this all day long. So it's a compromise. That's always the challenge with security. But we also augment that, like I said, with security awareness training, where we're making sure they understand that you don't want to let someone manipulate you into getting into an area they should not be. We'll do tests where I go to Goodwill and you can get a shirt from pretty much any vendor you want. So I'll get one from the local cable company, basically. Come in with a clipboard before anybody knows who I am. And 99% of the time I can get into their wiring closet or server room or whatever is relevant, because I tell them, we're doing a free promotion to upgrade your internet. We just need to look at your modem, make sure we don't need to order a new one for you. If you could just give me a second to go back there. And they'll, let you in and walk away. So explaining to them that things like that are just as dangerous as getting a computer virus. And everybody always says, well, why would they do that to me? Well, because you care about your data, right? Even if they don't think they could sell it to somebody, the idea of ransomware and all that stuff has at least made people start to understand that if you think you're just some little old dentist office in South Carolina and you're safe because of security by obscurity, that's not true. You absolutely could have somebody walk into your business to steal records. And once you make them understand things like that, they're a lot more protective of those armbands. They're a lot more protective of their workstation. They understand why you're locking it. Because, once they understand that the business they work for could go out of business if they don't take care of this, and you make it real to them, they have to participate, I guess is what I'm saying. So that armband, yeah, they absolutely could have it removed. The chances someone's going to come in by force and try to remove it from them is less likely than them taking it off and leaving it on a table somewhere. So, if we can educate them to actively participate in this more, that removes the vast majority of those type of risks.
So, all right. So the bracelets, how much are the cheap rubbery Livestrong ones?
I order them in bulk from China, to be honest with you, and they're
Oh, okay.
They're a couple bucks. The expensive one, you're talking $800 or $900 a piece.
Got it.
And then you got to put the card readers into all the machines. Those are $100 or so. And then obviously the access control system for the building varies on what system you put in and how many doors and all that kind of stuff. So it's not an overwhelming expense for them to do it. And it's been very well received. The other thing is obviously dentists and doctors and lawyers and accountants and those types. They actually really like showing off their technology to each other. And it's a very visible thing they can show their peers. Look, I have this now, and this is how I authenticate and log into my office. And what are you doing for that? And it goes out there and sells for you and markets pretty well because it's a visible instance of cybersecurity that is tangible. It's something they can show versus, well, they installed some software. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it does, but they say it makes me secure. It's the same thing. They can hold out their iPhone and show them the cameras that they have at their office and what motion events have occurred and who came in the doors. And
right.
Again, physical security and a lot of those things is not something you typically think of as what an MSP needs to be doing. But it's hard to have cybersecurity taken care of if you don't have physical security taken care of, like we just described. And two, a lot of this is about perception. And if you can get them to perceive that they are now more secure and talk to their peers about it, you'll get more business, you'll get more people to participate. And this is all about getting people to participate. If they feel like
and I think we as MSPs all understand that.
Yeah.
So that's honestly, that's exactly why I wanted to know more about these wristbands, just because I think this is a neat idea. I mean, I never thought of that. And I'm not saying that like I didn't know anything like this existed, because I'm pretty sure just about anything exists at this point. If you can think of it and it's something that, NFC wristbands, like, of course China's already made it, like
well,
so
that's a good point. That's an example of what I'm trying to do. So when we come in the beginning, we do actual user studies is what we do. We say, what are the roles you have in your business, right? And then we sit down with one of each of those roles. And that's how we discovered this. We watched a hygienist at a dentist have to take their gloves off, type on the computer, put more gloves back on, remove their mask to authenticate on their phone. And, it was like, good Lord, they're doing that 40 times a day.
That's a lot of time wasted. And if you think about it, like, they probably have to waste a lot of pairs of gloves doing that. So, I mean, selling them this NFC thing is probably a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
It's a big upfront cost, but when you show them, hey, look, you've got all this PPE. We don't know when all of these ridiculous requirements are going away. How much are you spending in PPE on a daily basis?
Yep.
And then break it down for them, and then you can show them, oh, well, here's your ROI by just buying X, Y, and Z from me.
Yep.
That makes it real easy. And what's really cool, like, while we're talking, I Google searched, I found shopnfc.com, and this website, I mean, they've got everything, man. Like, they've even got, so when you look at the wristbands, they've even got those disposable ones, the kinds that you'd get as like a patient. So now we'll
give those to vendors when they come in sometimes,
Yeah.
That's the other thing. Like, we can now give them to their janitor, their UPS driver. They all have those, and those are time limited to get into the building and only into certain doors. You've always been able to give people cards and stuff, but it's another thing. It's harder for them to lose if it's a wristband and stuff they can throw on in the morning. And I've actually got enough that I've got UPS drivers that I can have them have one armband and let them in multiple of my customers. So, there's interesting stuff like that was not the intent of it at all. But it's just, I mean, I've got a numerous list of examples just like this where I would have never thought about this had I not sat down and watched a user fumble around. And like you said, efficiency is something that drives me crazy. If I see somebody being incredibly inefficient, like I said earlier, if their practice management software takes 5 minutes to do something every time they do it, and they've accepted that over the last 12 years or whatever, that just blows my mind, and I have to fix it right away. Because if that's happening to them 20 times a day, that's, an hour that they've wasted waiting on software. And that's just asinine to me that people have learned to accept that. And, I think you wouldn't necessarily find that if you just said, we're going to come in, we'll install our RMM tool, we're going to install our EDR agent, we're going to upgrade you to the latest Windows 10, we're going to run, some of the optimization stuff. But if you don't really sit down with somebody and look at how they're using the computer, they're probably not going to see much efficiency gain or anything from that other than, when they're running out of disk space or something, right? That's not, I think a lot of times people look at it from the wrong angle. Like, have you improved the user experience? If you haven't improved the user experience, they're not going to want to keep paying you, right? If you've checked off your boxes as an MSP that, well, I'm now monitoring all their systems, they've got an EDR tool on there, a malware tool of some kind, and I put in a new firewall. A lot of times that checks all your boxes. I did something to make their network better. Well, you got to ask yourself, what changed for them? Do they have anything that's better today than it was before? Probably not. That probably didn't change anything. If anything, some of that might have made their experience slower or more cumbersome. So, I'm not saying it's just like you said, I didn't come up with something amazing new technology by using an armband, but I do think it's a new application of it that, is not being commonly thought of. And it's not something I do at every customer. There's other scenarios that, I've solved problems for an accountant versus them or something like that using a totally different solution. So that's me. Anybody that knows me, I love gadgets. I love trying to find ways to make technology useful and consumable, not just technology for technology's sake.
Awesome. So you said you've partnered with Chubb, and they're the company that owns Cysurance. I've never heard of Cysurance.
Correct. I think they started up last year. Obviously Chubb insurance is huge and more European and everything, but it's been around for a long time. But they spun off. I don't know if they acquired it or spun it off or what the situation was, but they created Cysurance with the idea of being just cybersecurity and errors and omissions type insurance. And it's interesting, not to be an ad for them, but as part of partnering with them, you get a really good deal on your tech E&O insurance, along with I think it's, there's different levels. I think it starts at like $750,000 of cybersecurity up to $2 million. And then, like I said, it also has your errors and omissions insurance, and it covers data loss and a lot of stuff. And it's relatively, as insurance goes, relatively inexpensive. You get that for yourself, and then you get the ability to sell these policies, which, as long as people fall into lower risk industries, unlike, healthcare and some of those, it's a cookie cutter policy that they do not have to go through any extensive application process. They literally fill out one webpage form, submit it, and they're then authorized. And they'll either bill them directly or you can bill them. And so the only challenge is there's weird regulations around you can't upcharge for insurance. So you have to call it out as an individual line item somehow on your bundle it in. So there's some weird things like that. But like I said, it's been very productive to differentiate myself. And it's another tangible thing, more tangible anyway, as it relates to the service that people can point to, as opposed to all the intangible technology things we do behind the scenes that nobody really gives us enough credit for. Insurance, they understand its value. And then, like I said, it's always been the case that, you want to do a lot of reports and you want to do a lot of stuff to smack people in the face with, I'm doing something for you. I'm doing something for you. Because if you're doing it right, you become invisible. So I think these are more of those things that, just trying to find ways to remind them of what the value is. Because I'll be honest, I've over the years, I think what we do is so akin to insurance sales. It's crazy.
So do I, man. I think
you really have to make people value something that has not happened to them yet and make them understand the impact it will have if it does happen and the cost of inaction. And, I do not envy someone who does only insurance sales for their life, because it's very challenging. This is an event-driven business almost. If they've had something happen, then it's very easy to explain to them why they need all this stuff. If they haven't had it happen, if they haven't had any data loss, if they haven't had a ransomware attack, if they haven't, had any significant hardware failure, if they haven't had anybody, steal data, none of these things have happened. They all sound like far-fetched nerd speak to these people. It's not something that's going to happen to me. That's just something you spend all your time thinking about. So you think it's going to happen to everybody, whereas if they've had something happen to them, and, we all take angles of things like, well, let's show them, we'll do a security audit and we'll, do things like ID agent and do dark web searches and all those things, which, sometimes that helps, but then it also just seems like, well, of course you can find some evidence that validates what you say. You're trying to sell me something. So I've just been trying as many things as I can to, for two reasons. One, I want to actually provide some of these alternative services, but two, everybody in the MSP space knows it's really hard to shorten the cycle and get people to understand that, there's more to this than we're just going to install a bunch of boxes, just like the last guy that installed a bunch of boxes that didn't work for you.
So now I'm dying to know, what other fun gadgets have you played with, man? Like,
well, I mean, I
like toys.
Yeah. So a lot of the other stuff is more traditional, but it's just, again, being willing to accept kind of a lesser role, doing something that may be, out of your core competency, but just to get the business. So we did a lot of work on building, Zoom rooms and Teams rooms. There's some really cool stuff that you can, once you get deeper into Teams rooms, for instance, and you build your own boxes and you can manipulate the config through AD and that kind of stuff. They've got, for instance, a whiteboard set up now where if you place a 4K camera pointing at your whiteboards, basically, it doesn't even have to be straight on. When you switch and say share whiteboard, it takes a still picture to get a mask of what's on the screen. And then when you walk in front of it, you're transparent. So you can still see what was written on the board, through someone's head and through their hand.
That's cool.
So, that plays really well for large. We have can't say who it is. We have a big shoe company here, put it that way. You would definitely know who it is. They had 18 conference rooms, and, they were looking, because now everything's shifted to, they're talking to their customers and clients and sponsored athletes and all those kind of things. So they wanted a really nice video conferencing setup for all of the rooms. So basically it's the normal thing. You've got two screens for showing the people and the content, and then big whiteboards with those cameras so they can do that. And then either a Logitech or Creston control pad on the table, and then beamforming microphones and things like that. So again, I don't want to be an AV nerd and install conference rooms everywhere because the margins aren't huge. I mean, you can only do so much there, but you are selling them Teams then, which gets you into 365, which gets you into, now getting your way back into the core of the organization. And again, it's another thing that shows really well. I mean, you can make money off of it, don't get me wrong, but it's that would be an whole business into itself. So that's one thing. I think the other that has shown really well is I was an early beta tester for the Ubiquity Unify Access product. So that's actually what we're using for door control and working with that for smaller businesses, I don't know how well it scales, but it's actually really cool how it works because you have a controller you put in that's a PoE. It's a box that you just plug in PoE, and then you plug in the door controller, your magnet, your key strike, all that to it there, and it's powered by PoE. So you don't have to run all the other low voltage structured cabling over to it. You just run your same old Cat5 over. And then it's all controlled through the Unify controller, where Unify Protect is, and Unify Network if you're using that for their Wi-Fi, which that's what we use for, the network and Wi-Fi, and Unify Protect for the cameras. It's nice, again, because they get you can give them an iPhone app. They can look at their cameras really easily. They can look at all their door records right there, also looking at their, Wi-Fi and that side of things. So that's been another one. They have a nice doorbell unit that also is a card reader. They can put PIN codes in if they forget their card or badge or, wrist bracelet or whatever. You also then can do PIN codes for vendors and things like that to come in. And then it also, does cutesy things like says, "Hello, Eric," when you open the door and stuff. Again, necessary? No, but it sure makes them happy that they got something cool. I mean, they literally will bring their friends to show them say their name. It's so that's been, Unify has its own. I'm sure everybody on here, there's probably some that are groaning at that because, Ubiquiti has its set of problems. Don't get me wrong. But for smaller stuff, it really does help you get in there quickly and easy, and you can scale it later, to some of the higher end products. But again, it's more about getting them started and doing something, and the barrier to entry is much lower with that. Because again, you don't have to do a big structured wiring job to run all the low voltage cabling everywhere. You're just running your Cat5 when you're running the other, or Cat6, whatever. So that's another one. Let's see. I mean, a lot of the stuff I don't think is incredibly unique as far as what it is. It's just like you said, it's all out there. It's just figuring out, what it is that bothers them the most. Another thing that we've done is for restaurants that are bringing back live music and things like that. A lot of them now will have live music in an area of the restaurant that isn't even open, and they're streaming it. So they'll have it on the TVs and they'll have it on their Facebook page. So just putting in a camera and setting up OBS for them, and letting them have a streaming setup. Again, then that gets us in there where we can do their point of sale business and that side of things. So I try a lot of Trojan horse stuff. It's from my purview, like I said, of being at a channel vendor, I think you got to do a lot of these kind of things just to get in there. It's all about trust. I mean, when you're a channel vendor, you're looking and you're saying, the reason I'm using MSPs as my sales channel is they already have the relationship and they already have the trust with the customer, right? Well, that's not easily built. We all know that, right? So
no, it's not.
I've watched,
and it is easily destroyed.
It's super easily destroyed, which is why I say, as painful it is looking at your spreadsheets and your reports on P&L that you don't have the, MRC that you wish you had for that customer yet. If you slowly build it by some of these things, you do much less damage, early on by trying to do too much too fast. Believe me, I'd love to have, a 200, 250 per user, run rate on everybody, but, good luck. You're not going to just get there day one, if ever, maybe. But if I can get, $10 a user doing one of these other things just to get started, I'll very quickly get it up to 50 and then 75. Whereas if I tried to start at 75, I would have never gotten there. And I don't know if that's common for everybody, but it's certainly in my market is what I've seen so far. And it's kind of what I saw looking from Green Cloud down a lot of times and from the telecom side down.
So how many staff do you have right now?
Right now we're just 3 people. I bring in, I'm actually on the advisory board for one of the colleges here that has a cybersecurity program. So I bring in a lot of interns is how I try to offset that. So, a lot of this is, again, I'm willing to experiment for a long period of time because my game plan is building out a regional that's based on these, individual markets. So
Sure.
a lot of what I'm doing right now is experimentation to see what works, a lot of A/B testing to see, what I want to do more of. So I haven't scaled the business very far with individual, growth there. I did initially build a SOC, a physical space that I was going to staff with, the normal pool of folks, but then COVID hit. And, number one, I don't think anybody cares what your office looks like anymore. I don't think
Not even a little.
nobody even asks what, show me pictures of your knock. That's not even somebody even knows to ask anymore. And not only that, they fully expect that
if they do, you just go to one of those stock image sites.
Yeah.
And there you go.
Yeah. Well, I have pictures of the one I built now, so it's basically stock, but I don't have it anymore. But,
yeah. Well, just send me a copy of that, and I'll send that to my people too. It'll be perfect.
Yeah. So it's it's something I wish I could tell you. I had 20 people and we're churning out, 10 grand of new MRR a month. That's not where we are. That's where we're headed. A lot of where I am, I started this last March like a maniac, right when COVID hit. I wish someone had given me a memo ahead of time, but
I think technically there was a memo.
Yeah.
Just, here on the east side of the States, we just didn't think that it would ever come this far.
Well, I had already started the process, done a lot of my initial investment, and I kind of had that opinion of like, well, I've kind of put enough gas on the fire now. Stopping it would be a huge waste. So let's just hope this only lasts for a few months, which is what felt like worst case at the time. But what I've done
Can you believe it's been a year?
Yeah, no, I can't. But what's been good about it is, like I said, doing a lot of the research and seeing it's made me do the hard thing, which is, try things, figure out what works, get better. And then once you've got yourself really polished, then pour the gas on it and get out there where you can build your reputation based on doing the right things that more people want. And that's where we are now. We're getting a lot better response from everybody when we're coming out there. I don't know. It's definitely a combination. One, the world has opened up a lot more as far as people being more receptive this year to taking meetings and stuff like that. But two, I think we have a better story now that resonates more.
Sure.
So it's like everybody. It's what I tell people all the time, who want to start a business. It's not like you have a good idea and you just start making money the first week. It's a years and years process. And as long as you are progressing and you feel like, your plan is proving out, whether it's slowly or not, you just keep going, right? And you just keep going no matter how much it hurts. And, it's starting to hurt less is kind of where we are. So, that's why I said I don't consider myself, the number one most successful MSP in the world by any means, because I'm not yet. And I don't necessarily say that I have all the ideas figured out, but I do have some interesting angles, like I said, from looking at it from the vendor perspective for a long time. And we worked very heavily. Green Cloud's philosophy is to sell beside the partner. So we had a lot of end user meetings, and I was the CTO, and I'd get pulled in on a lot of them, whether it's for the name or whatever it happened for. But so I saw all across the country, what worked and what didn't, and what seems to resonate and what doesn't. So, I'm trying to leverage that, and I'm happy to help other people leverage that as well. I want to see this work. Like I said, I'm a huge advocate of, I love technology. I'm willing to experiment with things before they're really ready for prime time. But, end users aren't. It needs to work. It needs to be something that makes their life better. And like we were talking about that armband thing, that just makes me giddy how happy they are. And they all show it to me when I come in, like they think that's something that made their life considerably better. And it's a good example of something that when I was starting this, I didn't think about that at all. Like I wasn't thinking about how I was going to do physical security. I wasn't thinking about how I was going to do how can you make login during COVID better? Wouldn't even have thought of that as a thing.
So let's rewind quite a bit.
Okay.
You started an ISP as a teenager.
Correct.
Now you said that was in the 90s?
Yeah, I started it in 93.
Okay. So full disclosure, 93, I was like, 9 years old. Okay. So, you got a little bit on me,
Yeah.
but I think we're close enough that, I remember the 90s. Now at like 9 years old, AOL was kind of popular in 93, right? But like DSL wasn't a thing yet.
No, DSL. And it's funny.
DSL didn't get popular until like 98, 99, right?
Right. So my partners and I, we called the ISP Carolina Online. We did it very intentionally because that's what people thought of was the internet, was America Online. So by creating Carolina Online, we were making a more localized, personal version of the internet. And people really thought that. I mean, that was a marketing bonanza that we did that. People thought basically they were getting America Online by doing it. So
that is hilarious.
We were in, so I'm in Greenville, South Carolina, which is the western part, mountain, foothills of the mountains. And there was nothing, internet wise being built here in the 90s. And it actually came out of, when I graduated high school, I went to Clemson University, which is right here. And the provost of the school, they had put in, I think we actually had a 56K internet connection at that point for the whole school. But they had put that in. Yeah, everybody. But there was no, I'm really starting to feel old now, but there literally was no web browsers. This was all using like FTP and Gopher and email and stuff like that. There was no, I installed the first, web browsers and NCSA web server for www.clemson.edu and stuff back then. And nobody knew why you would have a web page or anything else. So I don't want to sound like back in my day, so I'm going to stop that. But the president of the university basically said, we've got tons of off-campus housing and people are going to need access to the network. It wasn't even the internet at the time. They were just going to need access to the network because email and actually sharing documentation, stuff like that between the professors and the academic side was becoming a bigger thing. So he put together a team to build an internet provider basically for off-campus. And I was on that team, and they decided not to do it, but we had already figured it out. So, people were selling their cars and refinancing their home and doing whatever they could for us to get enough money to start the ISP. So it was me and 4 other guys. And so we started it with our money like that. We built it up to about 40,000 users. And then we sold that to to your point, around 99, DSL was really starting to kick off. And we had to make a decision of whether or not we were going to put in DSL equipment and spend millions of dollars, building out our own network to do it, or, just merge with somebody else, like at the time, Bell South or whatever, who needed internet. So at the same time, local phone service got deregulated, and we got purchased by a company that was going to become a competitive local exchange carrier. And that was Nuvox Communications, which eventually became Windstream. So we were the, data network side of a telephone company who knew nothing about the internet or what, why you would do that. So it was really fun. We built it out all the way through, the frame relay, ATM days, to building out one of the largest MPLS networks that was built early on. I think
that's so cool.
And at the time I was in my 20s, just getting these multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment that nobody knew what to do with, and then we'd figure out how to make them work, and then built a big VoIP network. And so, that's always been my thing, is to figure out these, burgeoning technologies, how to how to make them usable and consumable, and it's
Sure.
been a lot of fun. But then that's when, after that, we in 2011, several of us from Nuvox left and started Green Cloud, now focusing on the cloud technologies and doing a lot of the same things. So we built out data centers all over the U.S. and sold that through the channel to the same people that we had been working with for internet and phone.
All right, so I want to get to Green Cloud in a moment. Let's stay on the ISP here.
Sure.
So, you're talking about buying like millions of dollars worth of equipment. You had 40,000 subscribers, and you were charging each subscriber like $20 or more a month, right?
Yeah, well, it had just changed. When we first started, you paid per minute. Yeah. So you would pay us like $9, and then I can't even remember how much it was a minute. So we did all usage-based billing, but at around 97, 98, we changed to $19.99 unlimited because that's what everybody had done.
Right.
So yeah, it was a pretty good revenue stream. There's no doubt. But it was also very expensive. I mean, we had massive modem pools, server farms to do. I mean, we did it all ourselves. We weren't outsourcing anything to anybody, so.
So there's a lot of IT people that don't really understand how an ISP works. And I'll be honest, I'm kind of in that boat. Like I even went and took a tour of a smaller ISP, and I still just didn't get it with some of the things. So like, let's just take my home situation here. Okay. So I live in Medina, Ohio, and I am thankful that I don't have Spectrum or Cox or any of those. I have a little company called Armstrong.
Okay.
And they're fantastic. I pay, I don't know, 110, 120 bucks a month, and I get gigabit down.
Awesome.
And then I think I get like 25 meg up or something, like, the upload, who cares, whatever. I upload a few gigabytes to YouTube every week. Otherwise, whatever.
Right.
So I've got a gigabit. My neighbor's got a gigabit. Well, no, let's be honest. Most of my neighbors are probably on the 200 meg.
Right.
Everyone's on the cost effective one. I'm the only nut that thinks he needs a gig.
Right.
But like, okay, so we all connect to that, it's like that green box that's in the ground, right? And then that box has what, fiber running back to the central office?
What technology is being used? Do you know if you have DSL or not? Is that what
it's cable, but I couldn't tell you other than that.
So it's coax cable?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, how that works is you are on a shared media. How that works. So basically your coax is going to that junction box out there literally is just electrically connecting everything together and putting everybody back into a distribution cable that eventually, yes, will go to a box that has a fiber home run back to what they call the head end of the cable side. If it was DSL, it'd be very similar. You'd have copper wire going from your house. That box outside, again, is just a copper distribution that'll go farther down the road, maybe, half a mile. And then there's a box where all the copper plugs in called a D-slam that then has fiber going back to it. So yes, in most cases, whatever distribution wiring they're using is going to go back to an aggregator of some kind, and then you're going to be sent back fiber back to their core facility, the central office or head end, depending on what the terminology that people use. Now, there are also things where you can get fiber to the home or fiber to the curb.
Like Verizon Fios.
Yes. And in that case, the fiber, instead of aggregating, they're running fiber closer to you. So they're either running fiber to a node at the end of the street and you're getting coax back to you, which may be what you're doing, or they're running a fiber terminal all the way to the side of your house. So you'll see an orange cable coming up into the box on the side of your house, and then you've got an actual fiber terminal connection. And that is also typically a shared media called PON. And so you're basically sharing the light with everybody else, but that media is so wide bandwidth, you don't really have to worry about that you're sharing it. Whereas coax, you can get congestion, on that because there's just not as much overall bandwidth. DSL, everybody says, well, you've got your own connection. It's better than cable. It's just where it aggregates, is a little different, but you're still shared at some point. Every service at some point, you're being aggregated into a box with a big pipe,
right.
So.
And I gotta say, whether I no matter where I've lived in Northeast Ohio, my cable internet has always been superior to DSL.
Yeah.
Every single time. And I don't know, maybe
it's that they've invested more money in their infrastructure. The DSL is still using the copper cable plant that was put out for, regular analog phone service. And in some places they've invested heavily in fiber and you have fiber closer to you, but in others you're on copper cable for a really long time. And there's a lot of problems with loss, and when it gets wet, there's issues because that cable is so old that at some point they put amplifiers and things like that on the line that screw up data services. So, it really depends on where you are. Like I'm down in the South where Bell South was. They spent a lot of money putting fiber out everywhere to get as close to customers as they can. So there's AT&T Uverse down here, which is kind of like Fios up north. But that's not universal, and it just depends where you are, what the cable plant looks like. If the cable company has spent more money burying fiber, then they're going to look better than the phone company that still hasn't. So there's not a universal answer to that. You can get into a lot of politics here because there was a lot of money that was supposed to be used to upgrade that infrastructure that did not get used to upgrade that infrastructure. So
we don't have to go there. Yeah. So, all right. So my house, their house, all the houses, they all go to I'm just going to keep calling it the big green box.
Yep.
And that big green box, is that thing basically just a big, tall outdoor switch?
Kind of, yeah. It's a media converter and, switch. It is usually Ethernet coming out of the back end of it these days.
Well, and I just want to clarify, I'm only saying switch for the MSP to think about what a switch does at its core. I'm not worried about the connector type. I don't care if it's an RG50 whatever or a. I don't care. That part doesn't matter. It's
basically, again, it's an aggregator, which is what a switch is as well. So there's different types of electronics depending on what type the connection is, but its sole job is to take a lot of smaller connections and aggregate them into one or two, upstream connections, depending on how it's built. Could be more, but and then there is a concept that is used very heavily in ISP and telecom world, which is oversubscription. Right.
Yes.
There is not,
and that was going to be my next question as far as how that works.
If you're in a neighborhood with 51 gig connections, there is not 50 gigs upstream from you. There is probably 2 gigs upstream from you, best case. Right. So it depends on who it is. 5-to-1 is that's what you really should do. Anything more than 5-to-1 oversubscription is bad in a lot of cases, but they're usually doing 10-to-20, maybe 40-to-50-to-1. Because that's money, right? I mean, they can't, those electronics get more expensive the bigger interfaces they put in, the type of fiber and repeaters they have to put in gets more expensive. So it's not just that they're malicious and don't want to put it in. It's that, everybody wants it for cheap and they want it fast. And it's really hard to accommodate both those requests without cutting somewhere. So, and that's also with like DSL and a lot of those things. How often they go back and look at that oversubscription and upgrade, that's when you're dealing with a network. And again, I'm not making excuses for them, but I've been in the seat where you're dealing with a network with millions of subscribers on it. You've got 100 people in your neighborhood. They're not showing up on any of the reports I'm looking at, if I'm at that level looking where to invest money, because we're looking at how does Ohio look, not how does your city look. And that's unfortunately what happens is you get lost in the aggregation of that. And that's, Some people do a very good job of it and do look at everything regionally very closely. So I've got a lot of friends that still do that, and I'm sure if they see this, they would be unhappy with my statement that they don't look. But the point is, you get lost in oversubscription and aggregation pretty easy as things scale up.
I don't feel like I'm getting lost in that. Like, when I'm doing something on the internet, like I get my gig, man.
Yeah.
So
that's probably
either my neighbors don't do anything or they do a pretty good job.
Yeah, you're at a smaller regional provider, it sounds like, so they can pay more attention because their purview is smaller. They don't have to look at as much, so they probably are doing a better job of maintaining the network. Right. And like you said, it could just be that the area you're in is not being as heavily utilized, and you're getting the benefit of that.
So you said that there might only be, hypothetically, 2 gigs coming out of my big, tall green box. Mm-hmm. But like, how? Like, so like, when they run wire from the box in my yard mm-hmm. to wherever the next box is in that mm-hmm. aggregating thing, right? Mm-hmm. When they run that wire, like, they're not running a wire that is only max capable of 2 gigs, is it?
Well, depends on which piece you're talking about. So the wire going from your house does have electrical limitations. You can only pass traffic. There's theoretical limits depending on the length of it and the gauge of the cable and all that kind of stuff, right?
Well, clearly it can do a gig. So what's its limit?
Yeah, and that's why you don't get bidirectional, asynchronous, where you're getting gig in both directions, because the equipment in that green box can push more traffic down that copper wire than your equipment is capable of, because those are higher end electronics with more power and everything involved. That's why DSL and a lot of these things are not symmetrical, right? The box sending to you can push a lot more across that wire than your little modem can push back. There's electrical mm-hmm. reasons why. And again, the cost of the electronics to do it are different. So they can't symmetrically both have both directions going gig. There's not enough bandwidth, A, to do that, and B, electronics wise, there's actually different levels of electronics on both sides. So there's all kinds of, we could get into the theoretical limits of what they could do on copper and everything else. And there's a lot of technologies that can do all kinds of amazing stuff. I mean, when I first started doing DSL, they were doing 1 meg on it, and that was like, they were blown away that they were able to go up 1 meg, because previously it was 56K modems was as fast as you were going to get.
1 meg is still almost 20 times faster.
So they keep pushing
the 1,000.
Yeah. So it was night and day. But then upstream from that, you're calling it the green box. Upstream from the green box, they're using traditional, Ethernet technologies, right? So they can do 10 gig, 40 gig, 100 gig. They could aggregate many hundreds of gigs together. So they're not limited there. The main thing they're limited by there is the availability of the fiber. And then that's going to get aggregated into some other box upstream that probably is going to do 40 or 10 gig. So you just keep getting aggregated and aggregated and aggregated until you get to the core of their network, which then probably is, multiple hundreds of gigs or, multiple 40 gigs, things like that, depending on the size of the network you're working with.
So when I say my internet's not fast at home, even though I'm paying for a gig, I'm only getting 300 meg, it could be the box, it could be something inside my house, but it could also be the wire going from my house to the green box or anywhere else from that green box along the way.
Yeah, you could be constrained.
Probably closer to the home though, right?
The most likely place to get constrained is that upstream from the first box. That's the biggest choke point, right? So from your green box up is very likely for you to get choked out there, because again, it's massively oversubscribed. the oversubscription gets less and less the farther into the network you go, because these cables that are carrying the thing aren't having to traverse long distances. They're within the same building and things like that. So they can put in 100 gig there, and it's not as big a deal. Running 100 gig miles, from a central office to your aggregation box is very expensive. So that's going to be typically the weakest link, is that, and then what's called the last mile, which is what's going to your house. So it's going to be one of those two: either the equipment or the cabling has issues, or you're constrained because it's oversubscribed too much.
Got it. So now let's talk about the fun part, the cool part.
Okay.
The actual head end, or whatever you call the big master hundreds of gigs room.
Yep.
Like what's it like in that room, and how do you get tens if not hundreds of gigs from your room to the internet?
So in the most simplistic version, I guess, initially, so like I said, you've got all of these end users being aggregated up. That's what's known as the access side of the network, right? You've got all of these people wanting access to the internet. So you're going to have these coming in from all those aggregation boxes. We'll say, your particular provider, I think you said it was Armstrong. This, for simplicity's sake, we'll say they have 50 different aggregation points out there that are all coming back. So those are typically going to come into an aggregation router of some kind that's going to have, 1 gig, 2.5 gig, 10 gig ports or whatever on it. And that is typically now going to be a router, right? So it's going to be dealing with IP traffic. It's not dealing with Ethernet frames or anything. Everything up to here generally has not been looking at the IP part of it. It does not know that this is HTTP traffic or anything. It's just frames. It's just packets of information. So at this point, is usually
ones and zeros. Best of luck.
This is usually the first place that it starts getting treated as IP traffic, right? So, and again, that could be at any number of places. But let's just, for simplicity's sake, say your green box goes directly all the way back to a central office or head end that has an aggregation box in it. There could be ones in between there in bigger networks.
Right.
Let's not go there. So let's say this is the box that you're actually getting DHCP from, right? If your box is set up for DHCP, this is the other end. This is your gateway, right? Your modem, your router there. You configured your IP address and you configured a gateway address. This is typically what that gateway address is. Again, there can be other variants, but let's simplify it down as far as possible. So now that box is going to have multiple, probably at a minimum 10 gig, if not 40 or 100 gig connections up to a core router, which this is going to be a box that has many, many, many slots, fully redundant power. There's probably multiple of them, and one connection goes to one router and one connection goes to the other. And then this is where now all the customers' IP traffic is being aggregated from all those aggregation routers. They will then have upstream from them other sites that have these same core routers. So you can kind of envision now building a ring of all the sites they have. And there's these core routers here, and there's another set of core routers here, and there's another set of core routers here. And each of those then at each of the sites connect to border routers, or, your transit or internet routers, right? And at they're going to have 10 gig connections, 100 gig connections to other internet providers, right? So there's a couple ways that can happen. If you're big enough, you do what's called peering, which means I'm just going to connect directly to Google because I have a ton of connections for Google, and all my traffic to Google is going to go across this connection. Even if you are big, you then also have things called transit connections. So you say, I'm going to connect to Verizon, I'm going to connect to AT&T, I'm going to connect to CenturyLink or Lumen or whatever they're called now. And we're going to advertise to each other what parts of the internet we know about using BGP. So BGP says, on my network, I know about all these IP addresses. So if you want to get to any of these IP addresses, you can come to me. The other one says the same thing. And so now my router gets all of those and figures out, okay, I know how to get to, in aggregate, all these IPs. And I know how to get to this one IP that you're trying to go to best by going across the Lumen connection, because it has fewer hops, right? It looks better as far as it keeps track of how many routers it's gone through, basically. So now that's what's happening. Your connection from your house, when you were looking at my webpage earlier, you're doing a DNS resolution, getting the IP address. That IP is not on your network, so it gets sent out your router up to that aggregation router. The aggregation router then goes to the core router. The core router looks and sees which border router has connections to where you're trying to go. And then that border router says which of my upstream connections has the best connection to this IP address, and then it sends it out that way. And then that all keeps happening throughout all these networks, the same type hops of route lookup and pick the best connection, route lookup, until it
and
gets
that makes sense because like once it gets from like my ISP to this next router, each router is a hop.
Yes. So that what I just described is
it
what
could have
trace route.
2 hops could be in the same building even.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of times it's bouncing around routers in the same building because again they're aggregating up because they don't want to buy internet connections for every single aggregation router or every single region.
Right.
They're going to again oversubscribe or at least aggregate, if not oversubscribe, into as few connections as they can, because those 10 gig connections or 100 gig connections to internet providers are extremely expensive.
And so to get one of these connections, like I remember in Akron, there was, I don't know if there still is, there was a Windstream.
Yep, that was a Nuvox
server room. I mean, that's server room.
Yep.
So the assumption is the internet's in that room. Like,
yeah.
So, like, just like ISPs are running all of these lines in order to build out that access network for my house and your house and whoever else's house to get online, they have to run infrastructure that takes them from their router to AT&T's router to
yeah. So think of like and I don't know if this is still valid, but let's say in 2006 or so, it was still valid when I ran it. Akron was subtended off of Columbus. So there was a Windstream facility in Columbus. So instead of connecting to internet providers, Akron would have multiple connections going up to Columbus. And then Columbus, I'm trying to think of what all it was. Columbus probably went to Louisville, Kentucky, because Louisville was one of the bigger cities. And then Louisville would connect to Atlanta and Charlotte, for instance. And then Atlanta and Charlotte would have the big connections out to the internet. So the number of levels of aggregation and hierarchy really kind of depends on, what city you're in, what provider you're using. But you can be certain, like if you did a trace route and you were connected to that Akron site, you would see it go probably between a couple boxes inside the Akron office, and then it would go up to the Columbus office and maybe bounce around a couple routers. Then it would go to Louisville, Kentucky, and bounce around a couple routers. Then it would go to Atlanta and bounce around, and then hit maybe Verizon or something.
So how does it get from Akron? I got to make the point be in the camera, right? From Akron to Columbus, because that's a long distance. I mean, we're talking, that's a 2.5 hour drive. So I suspect that's 150 miles. We'll call it as the crow flies.
Yep. So that's going to be fiber. So it's all speed of light at that point. So that's probably a 5 millisecond connection, something like that, 2 to 5 milliseconds.
So okay, is there just one really long 200-mile fiber cable going from Akron to Columbus?
Possibly, but most likely it's going to go through equipment that regenerates the signal, right? So, light's going to degrade over the time period, bouncing around in that fiber cable. Eventually, it's not going to be bright enough anymore. So in the middle, there'll be something that receives that and then regenerates the same signal brighter again. That's one way to think of it. So it depends on the length and the technology being used. They've improved technology where you can go farther without regenerators, because regenerators add latency, because it has to receive the signal, then regenerate it. Again, you're talking nanoseconds or milliseconds, but those all matter when you're doing this 20 times to get where you're going. So I don't know for sure, in that answer, but it could be. That's not out of the realm of a cable that could be non-regenerated.
So where the hell did they put that cable?
So there's aerial cable. So a lot of times it's running along the power, with the power line.
Okay.
It also, they run along railroad tracks very often because it's already there, and it's actually very easy for them to dig in. They have railroad cars, kind of like when you see them trench your yard to put your cable back in, it digs a hole and puts it in and fills it right back in. They can dig huge troughs and pull it along the railroad. A lot of times it's along major roadways. They're going to try to find something that's already been cleared out. So power lines, railroad tracks, roadways. That's why a lot of times,
highways.
If there's a big wreck, they'll cut fiber, because if somebody, a big truck goes off the road and buries itself 4 feet into the ground, it very well could have buried itself and cut a cable in half. Railroad derailments are another big cause of fiber outages. And then you might think this is funny, but that aerial fiber, there's something about some of the insulation they use that squirrels and birds and rodents love. So they'll chew it. There literally is a thing called a squirrel chew, which is an outage cause for fiber. A lot going through the deep south is all aerial because it's swamp and they can't dig it. And there's all kinds of creatures down there that love to eat fiber, so they'll chew through it. So
that is crazy.
Yeah, it's interesting the problems you run into that you would have never thought of.
Yeah. So I appreciate this because
I like talking about it.
The person that I got my little tour of a data center, he was the sales guy. Like sales guy doesn't know all of this stuff. I never would have thought, like, alongside a railroad, like, duh, that's genius.
Yeah.
No wonder they kick out all the homeless people. So.
Yeah, it's that right of way is very valuable, so they use it a lot because they've already got bridges built over waterways. I mean, that's prime real estate. So if you look at, it's not the only place, but the fiber distribution around the U.S., there's a lot of really important lines going along the railways.
That's really cool. Now, let's nerd out about railways for a little bit. Don't worry, we're not going to talk about our favorite kind of train cars or anything. So one of the organizations that I'm involved with is an organization that helps the homeless. So a lot of times, like every month we go out and we give them a nice hot home cooked meal.
Sure.
Really good meal. I'm jealous. They're eating it. I'm not. I'm just going to go get Mexican when we're done. Mexican's good. Don't get me wrong. But like, I think a couple months ago, they had like chicken and shrimp gumbo. And like, a month before that, I think they had like grilled steaks. Like we get such cool donations.
That's awesome.
So yeah, like, we'll do that kind of stuff. And recently we were going to like this section of railroad in the hood of Akron.
Yep.
And essentially the railroad company owns all that land.
Yes.
And we didn't know that. I mean, how would I know that? I don't live there. So the railroad company got like a backhoe or something, and they just went through there demolishing all the tents and everything. And
this could go through a whole. My father worked for the railroad, so I know a lot of railroad history. But when the railroads were built, the government gave the railroads insane amount of land, and they have their own police force.
Really?
Yeah, the railroad police are basically federal marshals. So they have their own police force to basically police that land. And they have kind of free reign to do whatever they want there. They're completely left alone. because of the laws that were created to, get the railroad built. So yeah, I could nerd out on that for a long time too, but yeah, it's its own crazy entity. I mean, they have their own retirement program instead of Social Security. I mean, there's all kinds of interesting stuff, but yeah, I think it sucks that they did that to them, but it's not surprising to me that they did it either, because they have a lot of the land where there's bridge underpasses and all kinds of stuff like that, and they'd say they're doing it for liability and everything because they don't want people getting killed on the tracks and everything, which some of that's true, I'm sure, but
sure.
Yeah, that you do have to keep in mind that they definitely own most of that land and enforce it very sovereignly.
Huh. That is really interesting. Do you have any other fun little known railroad information? You got any more dirt on the railroad I can have? Come on.
No, they probably have me killed if I told you any more. They do have their own communication system. They were one of the first people to get access to the GPS system as a civilian organization that's outside the military. My dad showed me when I was very young one of their control centers, and they could track where every train was down to like a meter. And at the time, the GPS system for civilians, you couldn't get more accuracy than like 100 meters or something like that. They intentionally made it not granular enough. But yeah, it's actually, again, has nothing to do with this podcast, obviously, but it's a very interesting society all in and of itself.
Very interesting. All right. Well, after the ISP, you went and were you one of the founders of Green Cloud?
Yes. Yeah, that was in 2011. It was me again and this time 3 other guys, and they were all from Nuvox Windstream days. So yeah, in June of 2011, we founded that, and it's still going strong.
And I'm actually in talks with them to do another one because they just like bought a.
Yeah, so now they're Green Cloud Defense. They bought Cascadia Defense or Cascada Defense.
I think so. So, and I'll have a bunch of questions for them, so I don't want to take up your time. I mean,
sure. But yeah, that was my life from 2011 until 2 years ago. Was building that up and going through all the trials and tribulations of basically the same stuff we talked about, making people understand the cloud and why you'd want to use it and what problems does it solve, and definitely with MSPs, making people understand that it's not necessarily better to build your own, because like what we just talked about, data centers are the same thing as what we're describing. You have to have all that aggregation and network build out and redundancy, and it's tough. I mean, yeah, you can definitely put a rack in your office and run people's virtual machines, but a lot more to it to do it right. And a lot of lesson learned over the years of how to scale that, and it's a really large organization now. We started with 4 guys. We were actually in a old warehouse building above a jazz club when we started. I used to be on calls with Cisco, and they would tell me to turn my radio down, and I couldn't because it was the jazz band playing underneath us the whole time. So, it's hilarious. That's the stuff I like, though. I like building it from scratch, and having those type stories. Same thing with like Clemson. When I was there, it was a 56K connection, and now they have hundreds and hundreds of gigs internet connectivity there. And it was really cool to be one of the people learning a lot of that stuff each step of the way of all these businesses. And it's kind of what I'm trying to do now is, again, figure out how to. I've got some stuff I'm working on product wise and stuff that I think will be pretty interesting. I may have a vendor session available for you for too much longer with some products I'm talking about putting together for security to take a lot of these ideas and productize them. So that's kind of what I'm working through right now.
I would be interested in having that conversation. So one of the things that I'd really like to start doing is educating MSPs on things that they're definitely not doing, but should be.
Yep.
Especially when it comes to like basics of cybersecurity and that type of stuff.
Yep.
As of right now, my opinion is pretty strong that I worry that MSPs should not be doing security. Not in a like, well, nobody should, but in a we should just outsource that to somebody who knows what they're doing kind of thing. Because I feel like many, probably most MSPs have fallen way behind when it comes to everything when it, with all the security that's out there. And I think a lot of it is because we're being sold to and we're not being educated.
Right. Well, yeah, I think there's a lot of mystery and intentional obscuring of how things work in the security space. Because I would argue, I think MSPs have a really large role to play, but it may not be the role that they think. Right. I think no security program is going to be successful if you don't get the participation of your client and all their employees. And a vendor that you outsource to is not going to be able to get that participation. And you're not going to be able to get that participation if you're not well enough educated on it. And as you get educated on it, you'll realize there's a lot of basic blocking and tackling you can do that massively reduces the risk. Having an intrusion detection system and having somebody run everything through Splunk or some SIM is great, but reducing the number of things that are going to that SIM, by having humans participate better, because I think the number one thing that all MSPs need to understand is that the individual humans are the weakest link in security. There is no box you can buy. There is no service you can buy that is going to stop people from getting social engineered unless you educate them, right? It's not a technology. It's not just a technology problem, because people in the hacker space, people have learned it's way easier to hack a person than it is to hack a platform, right? I mean, everybody has firewalls now that have basic NAT rules on them. Nothing's open 100% to the internet anymore. Nothing being a strong word, but it's a pretty good chance that someone's got a firewall that's for the most part protecting them. Yeah, they may have VPN rules misconfigured where people can get in that shouldn't, or maybe they left an RDP port open or something. But what's more often happening than not is the attacks are happening from the inside out, right? Somebody's getting phished or somebody's getting vished. Somebody's getting manipulated, bottom line, whether they're being called or emailed or, faked into believing they're winning something or, whatever the case may be. And then they're using that person's access against them. So, managing the people and focusing on that as one of the core pieces of security, I think, is what a lot of people miss. They're thinking that it's some really complicated technology problem to solve, which it can get very complicated. And there definitely are some pieces of it you should outsource to somebody. But I think MSPs are the place where a lot of the stuff has to get applied. At least the relationship and human to human stuff. There's no other place to apply it. You can't fully outsource that. So I would love to have a conversation around that, because I feel very, very strongly about that. That I think the people element is a huge part of security that gets overlooked in preference to technology being the way you solve it. Like EDR tools are great, but if you don't really understand what people's steady state is and what they're doing, understanding when something wrong is happening is very hard, especially if you go all the way up to an outsourced person. So a lot of the things I was talking about, like understanding the roles and what people do in a business and what they're actually using, that's some of the stuff I'm building right now, to where you can get a good understanding of what's normal for a customer. And then, not having to use all these lists and use all these other platforms. If you know that a dentist only goes from the operating rooms to 4 sites on the internet, why do they need access to any other sites on the internet? Right. And that's hard to maintain if you're using that with block list and everything. But if you have some technology that says no one at this company has ever gone to this URL, that's probably bad. Just some things like that, you can put some of those things in place that you just limit the exposure they have. They don't need to expose themselves to domains that were registered in the last 30 days, for instance. Almost every phishing domain that you hit was registered in the last 30 days. So if you just block all of those so they can't go to them, they'll miss out on maybe some new business that started for a few weeks potentially. But likelihood of someone registering,
are they actually trying to get to that new business?
Yeah, but the chances of somebody registering a new domain and having an active service on it within 30 days is very, very unlikely. The chances of somebody registering a domain to using a phishing attack the next day is extremely likely. So there's a lot of things like that I think are interesting. And this goes to, working with colleges and how they're educating people now. There aren't just, everybody always talks about best practices. If the human element and thinking about the psychology of things is becoming very important in security. And I think the MSPs have the best opportunity to do something because you're the one that has the relationship. You're the one they listen to. You're the one that knows these people and could even do any of this analysis. So I don't know. It's interesting. I'm sure Keith at Green Cloud Defense is probably saying, no, it's technology and you need to outsource it all to me. And there's a certain degree to that. That's right. But I also think he would agree that the MSP has a huge role to play in it. And I agree with you. You're absolutely right. I don't think MSPs know what that role is. And I think fear has crept in from lack of education and understanding. And I think it would be, this is one of those things that, competitive or not, we all need to do better there, because when one person fails, everybody in the industry looks bad. When that person fails, we all go down with them. So I think everybody getting better in space is important.
And the scary thing about that statement is, when one person fails, the whole industry looks bad. Right now, people continue to fail.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think we can all agree that exploits are going to happen, hacks are going to happen, but the things like the Microsoft Exchange Server thing. I think F5 currently has a thing. SolarWinds had a thing. I think ConnectWise might have had a thing. The list keeps going, and it's not even all just IT companies. I mean, was it NIH that had a thing? National Institute of Health. It was the big health one over in Europe somewhere. Yeah, but I think it was the UK. It's not just. Yeah, I mean it's not just IT companies. It's everyone's getting hit, and I think that right now we are all failing as IT people, as technology people. We're all failing, and we all need to get our shit together. Is the honest truth. And I don't know how we just magically do that, because I see cybersecurity as this to go back to what we were talking about before. I'll use a fun analogy. Cybersecurity is this train that's going down the track at full speed, okay? And we all hopped off that train when we got to a certain point. We all deployed our EDR and our DNS filtering and our spam filtering and whatever else, and we hopped off, and we stopped educating ourselves because we thought we had all these products that were keeping our clients safe.
Yep.
And how on earth are we going to catch back up to that train?
Yeah, and the scary part is hackers know that. They know that you're counting on firewalls. They know that you're counting on, EDR tools. They know you have an RMM tool installed, and they know you trust that stuff. So they're using a lot of that stuff against everybody at this point, because it's easier, like I said, to, hack somebody at an MSP and get a password, and you got the keys to the city then. And it's not I really don't feel like hopeless about it. It's a big education thing is what it is more than anything. Fear starts coming from lack of understanding, right? And so it's this big crazy thing that you don't know, and how are you going to learn? It's just like you said, that train's now a dot off on the horizon, and you're like, well, shit, how do I ever learn anything about that? I don't even know what that is anymore. So I think that it's really just everybody talking about it, and I think you got to talk about it to your customers and not steer away from it, because I think that's what happens a lot of times too, is people try to get their customers to do stuff. It's hard. They promise they're going to circle back to it. They never do. Trust backups and stuff like that, which you can't trust backups anymore because hackers are smart enough to know they need to install their stuff and then wait a long time before they use it, so it's even in your backups. So you can't just depend on a lot of the stuff that used to work. You got to be very diligent and active, just as much as you're monitoring backups and networks and, whether internet connections are up. You got to have an active thought process around security too. And a lot of it is, like I said, educating the end customer. You get more of a workforce if you get them involved in it, right? I mean, I have one customer who calls me all the time, excited that she caught a phishing email. She's like, I didn't click on it. I would have clicked on it before, but this is right. This is a scam, isn't it? I'm like, yeah, it's absolutely a scam. You're getting really good at this. And I had Post-it notes made that say, this is not where passwords go. And when I'm at customers, I stick them all over their monitors. And they say,
that is hilarious.
Then I come back and they've taken them all down. They're like, look, we put them into Keeper. They're in our password manager now, message received. So it's just a lot of stuff like that. It's just, that doesn't solve all the world's problems. But if those are 3 people within that organization that don't have their passwords sitting out on the screen and won't just click on a phishing email, you've made a lot of progress, right? And you didn't have to learn new software. I'm telling you, the people element is the key to getting a lot more comfortable with all this stuff. It's not the only piece. You do have to be technically savvy and have enough continuing education type stuff yourself. But I think, and that only helps you. The more you communicate and talk to your customers and show them value, the better for you anyway. QBRs and all that stuff are great, but if they tell people, well, hey, he just calls me every now and then and checks in, sees if I'm using my password manager or whatever, that kind of stuff goes a lot farther than, a report or, a QBR type thing. Just being proactive and showing people, and you don't have to do anything crazy. Just show them you're thinking about them and show them that you've got to, that they're making progress and you're proud of them. I mean, it sounds silly, but it makes a huge difference. Makes them want to do more.
Sometimes, you what is it? You get more flies with honey or something like that. Like, sometimes you just gotta, it's like your kids, man. When you were a kid, would you have rather, your parents crap all over you all day long or tell you how proud of you they are?
Right.
Like, clients are the same thing.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to technology. Like they all say like, oh, I'm technology illiterate, which, I mean, they're so illiterate, they don't even know what the word illiterate means. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, so you can't read technology. I get it. Like,
yeah. One thing that's really worked well for us is I kind of took it from the pharmaceutical sales side of things, especially when you go into healthcare because they're used to it, is bring in lunch or bring in breakfast, once a month. Just pick, you don't have to do it to all your customers every month, but pick a customer and bring breakfast or lunch and just sit down in the break room and be there. And, just ask people as they come in, how's it going? What's been working well, what's not. That stuff makes a huge difference. And you can interject education in there, as you're doing it. And you can do it fun ways, like I said, like those Post-it notes, or, joking around with them about something you saw on one of your reports or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The phishing test stuff where you catch people, that's one of the funnest times to mess with anybody. And you don't want to be, I'm the nerd and I'm smarter than you. It's more fun to have the page that comes up when they get caught be a joke and be something funny, and that you can reference back when you're out there and stuff. I do see a question that says he's concerned about this ability to resource yourself enough to manage security. With you got the smaller clients. And I mean, it's a completely valid concern. There's no doubt about it. It's all these things I'm talking about are more time, not less time. But I see it as the same thing as like patching and monitoring your customers. If you're not proactive on some of these things, this is just another thing that has to be added into the proactive list. And I think the challenge is getting to where you don't consider it something so different than what you're doing today. I mean, there's just practices, compliance and security sounds like this other thing, but you have compliance and processes and that kind of stuff around the other part of what you do for customers. These are just more processes that need to be incorporated into that. And, it's just like anything, just because you can't do it all doesn't mean you shouldn't do something, right? Even if you just do a few of these things, you're reducing your risk substantially. And again, even if it's something like the Cysurance stuff, that doesn't necessarily stop a breach from happening, but it keeps your customer in business if the breach does happen, right? So there's some things like that you can do. And, I don't have a problem with the Arctic Wolves and Green Cloud Defense, or, whoever you want to list. There's a place for them. They are building a workforce that is much more educated and capable than you're going to be able to build. And I think Anthony followed on with that same thing, is that, it's easy.
He's got a good point.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
He's got a good point.
Yeah,
and so he says patching and monitoring are more easily quantified and automated than securing apps, web servers, networks, endpoints, internal servers, software as a service, shadow IT.
Yep.
And he's right. I mean, when you look at it, like what is easier for me to do? Patch 1,000 endpoints or look through the logs of 1,000 endpoints?
Right.
And I think that's where MSPs need to get smart and learn how to work with some of these vendors, like the Vigilans and the other SOCs as a service that are out there. Right?
I mean, I think you can also then kind of use that same analogy. Patching thousands of servers used to really suck too, right? That is something that improved massively over time as tools got better and people shared a lot of those methodologies with each other. It's Anthony, I think my first answer would be, you're absolutely right. Like, none of this is easy. But I think we have to start taking some steps. And some of those things are, I don't believe that it's going to be feasible for you to look through all the log files, but I do think it'd be feasible to implement some practices that will reduce scenarios that'll even end up in the log files and things like that. I think as an industry, we could come up with some best practices that would, things like lateral movement on a network. Why do we allow desktops to talk to other desktops? There's no reason in most organizations, no desktop should talk to another desktop. What is the valid scenario for that? And if you leave it that way,
just in case.
Yeah. Well, that's the problem, is you leave it that way. Now someone infects one box and they can do lateral movement across your whole network. And so, yeah, you can either watch for lateral movement, or you can say, I know my customer well enough to know there is zero reason that Tom's machine should talk to Jan's machine. So let's firewall that off completely. And you can, you can do that at the software layer, and that can be exploited still. Or there is technology now, even the Unify stuff allows you to do blocking between ports on the switches and things like that. like I said, there's some new ways to do DNS filtering and stuff, I think, where you're not depending on a list being accurate, that you can stop some behaviors that shouldn't exist. I think there's things we can do. It's not foolproof. It doesn't stop every scenario, but it's a huge leap beyond what's currently happening. And it helps. A hacker always takes the path of least resistance, right? And if a lot of these things are the path of least resistance, and if you can shut down those and other people have not, they're going to go to the place where it's still easier to hack somebody and, not waste their time on something that's harder when they can go to 1,000 other sites and kind of nail it. So,
and Anthony's right. We probably should not be doing flat fee services for some of this, for a lot of these security things. Maybe we should go back to retainer based or time and materials based or something along those lines. Or maybe we need to stop saying, oh, it's $250 a user, and start saying, oh, it's $10 a user for port blocking, or find ways to break this stuff up so that way the clients understand I'm only paying for this stuff, and if I expect more security, here's this menu of more security, and maybe he's got bundles of all the things.
The challenge always becomes overwhelming people with too many options. You can go backwards sometimes too.
You're right, but I think as big as security is, like for any of you that have Sirius XM, there's a boatload of channels. You could print out a full 8.5 by 11 sheet and still not be able to necessarily read them all because the font's too tiny. My point is, we could easily have that size sheet with that many options for security because of all the nuances and just the different stuff that our clients are using. And is that the right way to do it? Probably not, but it would at least be a good demonstration of, hey, so here's why it's $800 a user, because we're doing all this stuff.
I think you'll make everybody on here happy if you can figure out $800 a user. That's for sure. I think.
If you look at some of these attorneys, though, Eric. If you look at an attorney that specializes in MSP contract law, $800 an hour. If you go to your local attorney who does some contracts here and there, $250 an hour. Yeah. Like the rates are ridiculous when you start to look at somebody that specializes in something.
It's our bane of our existence as IT people is that we've never, as a group, done a good enough job of holding value to where they understand. Lawyers don't bend on those prices. It just is what it is, and it's something you have to have. People understand the ramifications of not having a lawyer review their contract, right? People don't seem to understand the ramifications of not securing their network, right? It's not been. They all know somebody who's gotten screwed by a bad contract. They don't, no matter how often it happens, they just don't seem to know anybody who's gotten screwed bad enough that they feel like they need to pay a massive amount of these services. And that, I think, is the number one challenge on some of this stuff. I think it's a combination of both. I think Anthony's, on something there too, where you can have outcome-based one-time scenarios that then justify the maintenance of that one-time event, afterwards. But again,
maybe it should be project plus maintenance.
Well, I don't know. I feel like that's going backwards somewhat because then you're now having to negotiate every time you do something. You want them to see you as a kind of a general ledger code to where
$800 an hour. I'm happy to do that for them.
There's no easy answer. This is always one of our plights in this industry is how do you get people?
Oh, right. Like I'm not arguing with you. I'm just trying to be a devil's advocate. No matter what option you took, I would take the opposite one. Okay,
right.
So
I think the thing for me is, I think it's easy to get in a scenario where you do nothing because you can't figure out the perfect thing to do, right? You kind of get an analysis paralysis around security. I think there's some basic things that you can do that put the customer in a lot better position. Again, that could be probably a whole podcast in itself, but there's some of those basic things you could do that don't take a huge amount of maintenance ongoing and put you in a lot better position. I think things, like I said, like insurance, that puts you in a much better position, and it's easier to justify and sell to them. Some of the DR type options also help. If you can't stop it from happening, at least have a good plan for what you do when it does happen. Maybe that's step one, and then try to prevent as many scenarios as you can qualify and quantify, and at least do those. And, you be honest with the customer that security, as you can tell, is a very evolving thing. We're going to try to, build the best wall we can. But there's still people that have better ladders and get over, so that's why we have these things that when they get over, you've got insurance, you've got backups, you've got cloud recovery, you've got, whatever makes sense for the scenario you're talking about. I think that's the base level of stuff that needs to be happening across the industry, so that we're not just all, again, as strong as the weakest link, right? If too many more cities, especially if any more MSPs get hacked and many customers get hacked as a result of it, our reputation is garbage at that point. Nobody's going to listen to us as authorities on any of this stuff anymore.
Yeah. And let's be honest, we're headed down a path where we're eventually going to get regulated.
Yeah.
It's already starting to happen.
Yeah.
So,
it's a very challenging conversation. But like I said, I think you just gotta, it's just like everything. Like I said, maybe patching was the best example, but the number of challenges like this that have popped up over the years that seem insurmountable at first, you just have to start, slowly chipping away at it. And the fact that you did 4 things is better than you doing 0 things the day before. You may have missed the most important one, which is the 5th thing, but you'll get there next.
And I know that we could easily continue talking about this for, hours to come and still probably get nowhere. Right. But we are approaching the 2-hour mark. Holy cow. Anthony, I love all of your comments. I agree with you. We are at a time where we really need to be having these types of conversations, not just with our clients, but also with each other. I think now is the time for us to be working together and for us to stop looking at each other as competition and for us to start looking at each other as partners. Because right now, think of us like we're all brain surgeons and the brain is bleeding and I can't fix it and Eric can't fix it. But maybe if the 2 of us work together, we can maybe come up with a different plan than what each of us individually could have.
What's even worse is there might be a 3rd person who knows exactly what to do, but we're not talking to each other, so we don't find out. That happens so much in technology. It's extremely frustrating. That's why I love all the peer groups and things where people finally do let their guard down and talk about stuff, because, like you said, we're competitive, but if enough of this stuff happens and if we get regulated too heavily, that's going to be lights out for a lot of people. And, it would be silly to have avoided just talking to each other and sharing a lot of this stuff, because we all know there's more than enough for all of us out there.
Absolutely.
More often than not, we all lose to inaction versus losing to each other. So I think it makes sense for us to try to talk more And I'm happy to talk anytime you want on this stuff. As you can see, I love talking. But
Me too, man. Well, thanks for coming on here, Eric. I really appreciate
thanks for having me.
you taking time out of your day. This was awesome. Anthony, thanks for helping in here at the end. I hope to see you at one of the future episodes. Speaking of future episodes, tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern, I will be speaking with Paul Green about marketing your MSP. So I hope to see you all then. And until then, you all take care.